Turkey, once part of the powerful Byzantine and Ottoman Empire, and back then home to one of the richest cities in the world. However, modern-day Turkey is an economic disaster, and only one man is to blame for all of it.
Diyoruz, hatırlatıyorum. Bu 5 ülkenin iki dudağının arasına dünyayı mahkum edemezsiniz. Ve geliyorum bugüne, güncel durum şu, artık adeta Filistin yok, neredeyse tamamına yakını İsrail. Kudüs kırmızı çizgimizdir diyor.
President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is a man who thinks that economic policy is something you can just freestyle as you go along.
Avrosu altını olan varsa bunu gitsin Türk lirasıyla bankalarımızda bozdursun.
Under his excellent guidance, President Erdogan orchestrated a massive 92% free fall of the Turkish lira in the past 2 decades, even though at one point the Turkish lira was well on its way to trade one-on-one with the dollar. But today you can barely get 7 cents for 1 Turkish lira. This disastrous decline, together with a whole range of terrible economic policies, has brought the Turkish economy to its knees, and while desperately trying to hold on to power, President Erdogan has become a rogue agent in the NATO alliance.
Turkey is the biggest liability for NATO.
I am not saying we should kick Turkey out of NATO, but the question in the present tense, are they an asset to NATO? And what is NATO? It's a vital transatlantic alliance aimed to protect the security and prosperity of its members. And on that standard, Turkey right now is not an asset to NATO.
The United States of America wants Turkey to stop the invasion, to implement an immediate ceasefire.
And all of this has made Turkey an unreliable partner.
Now, joining the dark side is nothing new for Turkey, since Erdogan has a long history of choosing personal interest over the interest of NATO and even over those of his closest friends.
Some Turkish politicians are talking about Nazism and fascism in relationship to the Netherlands. This country, as the mayor of Rotterdam pointed out yesterday, was bombed during the Second World War by the Nazis. It's totally unacceptable to talk in this way.
In the month of January, Turkey violated a United Nations arms embargo in Libya. Turkish warships escorted a vessel suspected of smuggling weapons into Libya.
40,000 foreign fighters, jihadis from 110 countries around the world, all came into Syria to fight in that war, and they all came through Turkey. The caliphate was on the border of Turkey. We worked with Turkey. I was in Turkey more than any other country to have them seal their border, and they would not do it. They said they couldn't do it, but the minute the Kurds took parts of the border, it's totally sealed with a wall.
The invasion of Russia into Ukraine really showed Turkey's true colors, and it illustrated perfectly how the country is playing both sides while claiming to be a neutral party that wants peace.
Bir an önce ateşkesin ve barışın sağlanması herkesin faydasına olacaktır.
Behind the scenes, Turkey is catering to both sides while publicly they are condemning the war, which has earned Turkey the label of pro-Ukrainian neutrality, which is not meant as a compliment. You see, in his infamous wisdom, President Erdogan has not only crippled the Turkish economy, but he's actually made it completely dependent upon Russia.
We know that Turkey has a very delicate balancing act to perform. How is it going to appease both countries, especially given the fact that it's in the midst of a severe economic crisis? It needs to maintain good relations with both Ukraine and Russia.
Currently, Russia supplies well over 70% of the total wheat imported by Turkey. Next to this, Russia supplies well over 40% of Turkish gas, and before the pandemic, Turkey was earning well over $34 billion in tourism, of which Russia was the largest contributor, with around 7 million Russians visiting the country each year. These are just a few of the economic ties that Turkey has with Russia, but the complete list is massive, and if Russia decided to sanction Turkey, it can easily bankrupt the entire country. Which completely explains why Turkey has outright refused to join the NATO sanctions, claiming that diplomatic channels need to be maintained.
What's your expectation for talks going forward? Do you think that President Putin is willing to give Sergei Lavrov some negotiating power?
Well, both of them are my colleagues, first of all. Secondly, we are facilitators and mediators, and we have to be honest broker, and it will not be appropriate to say one side is more forthcoming, one side is less.
Now, in theory, this all sounds wonderful if you are truly concerned about diplomatic relations. However, this doesn't really come across when you're supplying Ukraine with dozens of TB2 attack drones that have decimated the Russian army. Turkey is basically breaking up a bar fight as a neutral party while giving one person a broken bottle to attack the other one. And even though it's a cheap knockoff of the American Predator drone, it is a highly effective piece of equipment. These drones have played a major role in decimating the Russian army.
Шестой полк почти потерял.
Что?
Шестой полк пока не могу доложить, пока собираю. Очень много потерь. Ждали. Голова колонны попала в засаду. Командир полка погиб. По остальным разбираюсь.
Russia has repeatedly asked Turkey to stop supplying Ukraine with the Bayraktar drones. However, Turkey keeps saying that these are private company sales and that it's not a state-to-state weapons deal. When I learned about this excuse from the Turkish government, I laughed my ass off, since not only is Turkey a heavily authoritarian regime that constantly tries to get foreigners extradited for just insulting their magnificent leader, but even the most democratic Western countries have strict rules for weapons manufacturing and are heavily involved in determining to who you can sell.
$23 billion worth of elite F-35 planes and drones bound for the United Arab Emirates.
It is typical at the start of an administration to review any pending sales to make sure that what is being considered is something that advances our strategic objectives.
It would literally take President Erdogan less than 5 seconds to stop the Baykar Defense Company from supplying Ukraine with drones. He wouldn't even need a court order or an official government phone call, since the Baykar Defense Company is owned by the family of his son-in-law. Erdogan's own daughter is married to the chief technology officer of the company in a country that he rules with an iron fist, and yet the Ministry of Defense claims that it's powerless to stop Baykar from selling drones to Ukraine. This is an absolute joke.
Ukraine has bought a number of drones from Turkey and says that it plans to build a factory to build more drones at a factory outside Kiev. So quite a big development here between Ukraine and Turkey.
So clearly Turkey is playing with the Russians here, and for some reason President Putin has not yet punished them for doing so. Now perhaps this is because Putin genuinely doesn't know how disastrous the war is going and what role the drones are playing in all of it, since his advisors are afraid to bring him any bad news and they just make stuff up. It could also have something to do with the fact that Erdogan and Putin seem to get along just fine, especially when fighting in Syria to help their buddy Assad and to push back the Kurds further away from Turkey. Or it's simply because of the fact that Turkey is currently acting as a nice workaround for the sanctions against Russian citizens. Because not only has Turkey openly refused to enforce the NATO sanctions, the Turkish foreign minister also went out of his way to specify that Russian oligarchs and regular citizens are welcome to travel to Turkey and do business in the country.
And in my country, I cannot allow any illegal activities. This is very simple answer.
So are Russian oligarchs welcome in Turkey?
I didn't say no, but my answer is very clear.
Are Russian oligarchs welcome in Turkey?
Well, if Russian oligarchs visit my country, since I didn't join the sanctions, I am not implementing sanctions. In principle, we implement UN-approved sanctions. So if any Russian citizens want to visit Turkey, of course they can visit Turkey.
Before we continue, please like and subscribe to support the channel. This was obviously a message to the Russian elites who were getting targeted by international sanctions in order to lure them into hiding/investing their money in Turkey, and some Russian billionaires wasted no time to make use of this offer. Roman Abramovich, for instance, who is known for owning the Chelsea football club in England and is one of Russia's most famous oligarchs, very quickly moved 2 of his super yachts to the waters of Turkey, since he was being targeted specifically by the international sanctions. These 2 yachts alone represent a total value of around $1.2 billion, which is a nice nest egg to have in a safe and friendly port. Now, even if NATO allies had managed to seize his yachts, Abramovich wouldn't have gone hungry anytime soon, since he's still worth around $13 billion. However, it's already down from the original $19 billion that he was worth last year.
Cayman Island-based Concord Management has $6 billion at its disposal, most of which belongs to Roman Abramovich. It handed out checks of millions of dollars to more than 100 hedge funds and PE firms, and when the oligarch got hit by the sweeping EU and UK penalties, these firms were left stranded. They can't get rid of the tainted money and they can't collect fees on it either.
But the friendliness of Turkey towards Russians looking to stash their assets abroad while completely disregarding the NATO sanctions goes much further than this. Because in the past few months, many Russians have brought in truckloads of cash, and when I say truckloads, I literally mean truckloads. You see, when the Russian banks were cut off from the SWIFT system, it became pretty much impossible for most Russians to transfer out money or to convert their rubles into other currencies. This meant that if you wanted to make a large purchase abroad, you would have to literally fly in the money, and that's exactly what some of them did in Turkey. According to real estate agents in Turkey, dozens of Russians have recently bought real estate in cash. Now, even though homes in Turkey are much cheaper than in London or New York, you're still looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars, and in some cases even a couple million for a massive property. So not only is this practice clearly helping Russians to circumvent international sanctions, but it's also a great day for Russian criminals because they no longer have to clean their money in complicated ways. If even regular citizens are flying in stacks of cash into Turkey, they can simply blend in with the rest of them, which means that they can literally take the money off the streets, put it on a plane, and start buying real estate in Turkey the very next day. This is much faster than their current methods and saves them a nice 20% cleaning fee. So obviously Turkey is catering to the Russians while supplying the Ukrainians, all to simply benefit Turkey and more specifically President Erdogan. Now, even though Russia is not punishing Turkey for playing both sides, NATO was actually contemplating this, and some Turkish banks were already preparing for the possibility of secondary sanctions. These secondary sanctions are usually applied to countries or individuals that assist the original sanctioned target, and Turkey is already familiar with how this works, because for a long time the Turkish state bank Halkbank was allegedly helping Iran to evade sanctions, and this brought down the full might of the US judicial system, going after the bank with a vengeance. Now currently, it's unlikely that NATO is going to take serious steps against Turkey, since they are indeed trying to mediate the situation between Russia and Ukraine. However, going forward, individual banks could still be hit later on for helping Russians to evade sanctions. So this all shows that President Erdogan is trying to profit as much as he can from the war in Ukraine while not upsetting his lord and master President Putin, who can literally destroy the Turkish economy in 5 seconds. This was Turkey, NATO's rogue ally in Ukraine. Please like and subscribe for more videos.